I am also the author of the Ghana Historical Dictionary, and today the topic is the research that my colleagues and I did on Islamic education, the secular policy that the government has put in place since 1987. Um, those of you who have followed Ghana recently, at least as recent as the last 20 years, are aware of the democratic dispensation that the country is following. But certainly we also in Ghana have a very large Muslim population, even though it is a minority in terms of religious distribution. And I will comment on how they have actually embraced secular education and what the government is doing about it. So I am going to read from my text so that I bring some kind of format to the presentation. And what I'll be doing is looking at a specific policy of the government and how that is setting an example of bringing Muslims into secular learning, especially within the context of the religious schools that they themselves run. On August 12, 1954, Ghana will have its first all-African legislative assembly. Before that time, it was run as a colonial country. Many of the senior administrative positions were held by British individuals. And of course, even in 1954, when we got Nkrumah and his group unofficially running the government action. And the government that the Ghana government upon independence will establish will be a unitary government, prime minister, and of course parliament, and that will be the first in sub-Saharan Africa. The national government adopted a secular constitution that prohibited the creation of political parties based on ethnic and religious principles. Even though civilian governments in post-independent Ghana had been overthrown by the military several times, still we had the supremacy of the state, and of course religion and ethnic population must subject themselves to the secular state. Such a ban notwithstanding, the national government have also permitted freedoms. The clearest articulation of rights is demonstrated in the articles of the constitutions, especially 1992, the Constitution of the Fourth Republic, under which citizens are guaranteed human rights, freedom of speech, as well as the right to practice one's religion. But I also make a point here and in other writings that I've conducted that it is not sufficient to say that there exists a secular constitution or to enumerate rights that citizens do have. Rather, it is very, very important that citizens accept the legitimacy of the government that is in place and therefore the state. Furthermore, it is important that the people recognize or at least perceive the state to be capable of addressing their concerns. And it is one of these particular concerns that I'm talking about today, the right of Muslims to run Muslim schools, and also the right of the government to argue that such schools must meet the national development expectations. Ghana had a long period of contacts with Muslims, and this will actually begin from the West Africa area that now constitutes the areas of Senegal to the western shores here through Mali. Of course, we have Guinea somewhere here, and then you bring it down to Ghana on this map. And because of that long contact, about 15% of the Muslim population, of the population of Ghana were recorded in the 2000 enumeration. This is very contested, so I must make that point. Because in 1960, when we had the first official post-independent census, the population of Muslims were recorded at 12%. Some have argued that the population for 2000 should have been more than 15%, and that the argument is that the Muslims were undercounted, but that's contested. In 2010, the most recent census, the population of Muslims in the country was recorded at 18% officially. If you go on Wikipedia and you look at religion in Ghana, somebody has entered 30 to 35% Muslim population. They even cite some of my own work, but that is incorrect. I never wrote anywhere that Muslims are that percentage. I think that what they are looking at is the population of the northern part of Ghana, where Islam had had influence, but those who ascribe to Muslim religion, that is Islam, officially is 18% for the government. Thus, for this presentation in which I discuss the place of Islam in the national context, it is important that we articulate how the religious and social concerns of Muslims are addressed within this secular state. It is therefore the thesis of this presentation that though a religious minority, Muslims in Ghana are first and foremost citizens, and they should therefore be able to negotiate the state through modern agencies. Also, as citizens, the state should see itself as obliged in addressing these particular concerns that Muslims may have. And of course, this kind of discourse is what the presentation here is trying to talk about. Without going into any long history of Islam in the context of West Africa, I think that it would be appropriate for me to point to certain factual statements here. First and foremost, I place Ghana in the context of the early history of the medieval history of West Africa. As a result of that particular contact, Islam spread into the northern territories of the British colonial Gold Coast. And as Gold Coast became a colony of the Great British Empire, labor would be required in building railways. Mining companies will employ labor. Then, of course, you have the cocoa industry that will be to the forest zone, to the middle part of the country, all will require labor. And it is from the northern part where Islam is strongest, where all these amount of labor, unskilled labor, of course, they can use their strength to dig and to do other things, but that is coming from the north. If you come from the north and you come to the southern part of the country, certainly you are a stranger in the south, because before the British had those colonies, you have the empires of particular areas. The Muslims and the northern people coming down are going to be granted land where they will establish their communities, which in the local languages they'll be referred to as Zongo, Z-O-N-G-O. A Zongo is land that does not belong to the Muslims. It's granted them. But as the cities of the modern societies expanded, these Zongos are going to be boxed in, because you're going to have settlements all around, and as a result of that, you're going to have overpopulation in these particular crowded Muslim and foreigners settlements. You are going to have a certain degree of unemployment that is going to you have the Muslim leaders providing education and also helping their communities maintain the peace of the community. So the earlier picture you saw of the older guy here is the Imam, the chief Imam. But Imam, as a chief Imam, is one of several Imams. And that's one thing that I discovered during the research work. He is one of so many. And his authority is over his only community, and then all the Imams elect one as the chief Imam. So his influence actually traditionally as a leader of a community, and he has no authority over anyone unless the one that the community has actually granted him. He prays for them, he conducts leadership for them, and then of course, if you look at this particular slide that I have now, you can see the mosque very much sticking out in the middle, but this is a typical Zongo Muslim community boxed in the city of Accra. If you walk through it, you have very little way of doing so. So high unemployment, little education in terms of secular education, and that can prevent the government really, it can present a problem for economic reasons and also for security reasons to a government. Now, I was looking at some figures as I was putting this presentation together. I looked at not only the population figures, but also literacy information. And the UNESCO information, for example, 2000, Ghana had for people 15 years and over, about 58% literacy rate. This is within the realm of the West Africa general sub-region. By 2010, the literacy rate in Ghana had gone up to about 66% overall. But if you look in the northern region where Islam is very strong, and you are looking at people 15 years plus, the literacy rate is as low as 22%. If you went to the larger cities in the northern region, you can have a literacy rate that goes up to about 40%, but that is not a representation is because the colonial government or the modern government had not really made great taking full opportunities that the government provide, because education has been free and compulsory in Ghana since 1952. Illiteracy is seen as a hindrance to national development, and in the recent environment of global economic competitiveness and the insecurities that come to be associated with political tensions that exist predominantly in the northern and of course the Muslim countries, it is believed that those who feel discriminated on ideological grounds, in this case because people are Muslims, are more susceptible to become a threat or create problems for the state. So at this point, what I want to do is to talk about what the government itself, knowing this particular issue as a developmental issue first and foremost, and also as a national security issue, have done. First, when we talk about Muslims in Ghana, it is a general term. The slide you see here is the slide of Amir Wahab ibn Adam. He is the head of the Ahmadiyya movement, and the Ahmadis are actually Pakistani-based Lahore movement. They are persecuted in Pakistan because they believe that finality of prophecy did not rest with Muhammad, but rather revelation can come after him. And Ghulam Ahmed from Lahore became the leader, and of course by the time they arrive in West Africa in the late 1890s, they have already embraced secular education. Of course, they may probably have seen the colonial government as their protector, and therefore they embrace it to spread education and also to preserve their movement. I interviewed the head of the movement in Ghana, and indeed many Ghanaians prefer the education embracement in the secular realm that the Ahmadi people have done so. So let me read a quote from this particular guy when I interviewed him on the subject of secular education. And I quote here: "We, the Ahmadi people, see secular education to be very useful because you cannot have a country make progress for its people when half of its population are uneducated. Everybody in the country has the right to learn. Unfortunately, some of our Muslim brothers hold the view that getting their children to the normal, that is secular schools, will take them out of the religion of Islam. we, the Ahmadiyya people, think otherwise. We feel that first, it is the legacy of Islam to learn. Second, it is important that we learn so that we can keep abreast with time. Thirdly, it is important to acquire secular education so that we can be useful members of our community. So we thought that instead of just talking about the benefits of secular education, we wanted to convince our fellow Muslims, for example, that we will establish school and do so. So we established schools. I understand that in the 1920s, when we began our school system in the Gold Coast, the then Governor Gordon Gorgesbeck came to visit our school as a sign to other Muslims that secular education would be useful. Our most famous secondary school in Ghana, in Kumasi, was established in 1950. That is T.I. Ahmadiyya Secondary School, to which many non-Muslims have sent children, and we never converted anybody against their will. So he makes the argument here that similar to the schools that Christian missionaries established, secular education can be had, either at Christian-run schools or Muslim-run schools. But still, you did not get many Orthodox Muslims going to either of these two programs in Ghana. I also interviewed, let me go here and show you something here. You see, this is the head office of the Ahmadiyya movement. This is a mosque of the Ahmadiyya movement in Kumasi. And then, of course, this is a mosque of the Ahmadiyya movement in London, which I visited during the research. And of course, they have embraced the British education system and provide the mosque as a learning tool for religious and Arabic studies. And they see the two as compatible in London, and they do see so in Ghana as well. This is a person here. His name is Imam Umar Ibrahim. He is the leader and he himself had received basic Arabic education, and he moved to Nigeria under the instruction of one of his teachers. Then he proceeded to go to Sudan, and by 1961 he was already in Saudi Arabia studying at Medina, the Islamic Institute, before Medina became the University of Medina in Saudi Arabia. And it is interesting that he has very much embraced the government move to bring secular education to Muslim schools, because he runs schools of his own. And let me read here to you an interview with him. During our studies in Saudi Arabia, I observed that even the Arabs instructed their children in Islamic sciences. They also taught or allowed these children to attend secular schools. This convinced me that Muslims of Ghana or Africa have either not been told the truth about the totality of education, or that we have limited ourselves by studying only Islamic subjects. I am convinced that Arabic studies is the foundation of religious education, but secular the great majority of Muslims in Ghana and many places in West Africa are low-income persons. They are security guards or truck drivers or laborers. Now, pointing me through the window to the window where we were doing the interview, he said, "Look across the street from here, and what you see is all filth. Filth. This is a sign that modern education has not been embraced by our people, and this is how you create terrorists. Why should we remain at the bottom of the economic ladder?" Now, he pointed a different direction. Look, this is the school that we have established, and this is the school that you can see from the window from there, and you have girls and boys. You see girls and boys also being educated there, and the format is very much Islamic, and they have women teachers who are working very so strongly to make sure that girls are included and not given into marriage very early in their lives. But that is a problem that they are dealing with, and they have to deal with the Muslim communities that are very traditional, similar to the chief imam community that I pointed you to earlier on. In about 1987, Muhammad Abdulai, who was a professor at the University of Ghana in theater department, was appointed the Secretary of Education and Culture by the J.J. Rawlings administration. And I talked to him as well. So in a conversation, he said as follows: I remember as a child when the women from our house went to the hospital and they came back to tell stories about how they had been touched by male doctors who were not Muslims. The men in our house became very angry. So I used to ask myself, even as a child, are there no Muslim doctors in Saudi Arabia or Egypt? These were the questions of a young boy, but these concerns remain with me even till today. And so as a basis of that, these are the individuals who will be pushing for a different way to get secular education to the schools. And in 1987, they came out with a plan to put secular Muslim proprietors would still have ownership of the schools. And this they have done successfully. And one of the individuals who actually helped do this is an individual with the name Rashid Bandamosi, who was a Northern Region Education Secretary during the time of Abdulai, Secretary of Education. I'll read one more thing and then I will put it in the general context for the next 10-15 minutes so we can have questions and answers. Bandamosi argued that if you observe the traditional Muslim schools that provided religious education to help the religious development of children, the teachers over there who are the imams are very much traditional. They have no concept what modern is really about. And sometimes they have actually focused on the classical Arabic and not modern Arabic. So what they wanted to do was that they wanted to provide opportunities for the improvement of this outdated traditional school system. To national education and therefore national development. He said, we envisioned that the best way to give Muslim children secular education was to use the existing Muslim education structures. But he also cautioned that we wanted, as he argued, to make sure that the proprietors of the school did not think that we were going to take their schools away from them. So they created what they call the Islamic Education Unit, bring in educated Muslim scholars to head the unit, and then also create Islamic Education Councils, into which you recruit the owners of the private Muslim schools to become the board members, regional board members, who will make sure that the content of Islamic education is maintained within the schools. And then, of course, they will also make policies working with the regional education officers in terms of how the schools are run. In my interviews, I recognize that even though this is a very good system that they are looking at, and this is actually Shiite mosque, because there's a small Shiite community in Ghana and they are not part of this particular conversation, but I think that you should know that. You will find a private school such as this owned by the guy in the cap over here with the white beard. This is Dr. Say, my colleague doing research, and this is a private school. It is part of the government system because it has bought into receiving government teachers, but the school still remains the property of the individual. But you can go to a small community in Cape Coast, for example, and you want the community also to establish a school that is an Islamic school. But look at the facilities. You can look at the first three grades, first three rooms, the doors you see, and you can add this particular structure to it, but still look at the compound where the students are taking classes. You can compare this to the background up there. You see those buildings on the top level. That is at the Saddle College. I used to teach there in the mid-1970s, and that's an Anglican school, and you can look at the facilities to be absolutely different. We can go somewhere in the central region and you can have another Islamic school that is within the community. And this is another picture of it. But look at this here. That's an Anglican church. And therefore, you can see the Anglican bishop, who was the senior religion teacher when we taught at Iddrisu. He's now the former bishop of West Africa. And this is an Anglican school, very firm, established school. And if you look at all these, the regional office, even within Accra, for the Islamic Education Unit, did not have permanent buildings until the U.S. Embassy built this particular slide that you see as a regional office for them and a community center for them. So the conversation that we are engaging in is this. The government of Ghana sees secular education is important, yet the government sees the local authority communities, the Christian community, and now the Islamic community as partners in the provision of education. And as partners in the provision of education, the government does not build structures for the schools. The schools first must build the structures, and then the government adopt and provide teachers. And the argument I'm trying to make here is that if this is going to work very effectively, we have to keep in mind that the Muslim community is not a wealthy community. The schools that the government has brought into the system are private schools. So the attention of a government policy, whether through USAID or any other kind of policies, must target the community Islamic schools to help build them good structures like primary through 6, K through 6, or even through the junior secondary school systems, the 3 more years, so K through 9. And once those schools are better established, certainly you're going to get more children going to those schools. From the numbers we calculated, about 250,000 students now attend these Islamic education schools. They are about 7% of the number of students in the school systems today. Certainly, we are not sure how many of these students have migrated after they finish the 6th grade into the public school system, so our numbers may be off. But even if we raise it to 10%, I believe that this is very, very significant, and that you can bring a lot of Muslim children to these schools where it is not threatening to Muslim parents that their children are going to be lost through secular education. Through this particular process, we think that much can be done to empower a system that is very, very innovative and actually could be very, very effective. Now, before I stop, let me use the next 5 minutes to point to some of the problems we saw existing in the schools, in addition to what I've just talked about in terms of infrastructure. The administrators within the Islamic Education Unit are university-trained people. They themselves went to secular schools. They have had Islamic education in after-school programs, and therefore now they argue that after-school programs can be very useful in maintaining school Islamic content of the schools. But they recognize that there is a tension between them as secular educated people and the religious leaders who are the owners of the schools. And even in the Islamic councils that have been created, just 2 years ago, the councils amended their constitution, and they did not give too much influence to these educated Western people. Rather, they are going to be ex-officio members and giving advice, but the more you meet these administrators, the more they think that they should lead the charge in trying to modernize the whole concept. There is also the issue of funding, which I believe that the Muslim community itself can do something to address it. The chief imam, we talked to him about that. He argues that he's in support of the system, but as is in Ghana and as is in many many parts of Africa, people do not trust the system into which they make contributions because there's not sufficient transparency. And so one way probably would be educating the community in terms of certain foundations into which they can actually make donations, to which it can go exclusively towards improving community Islamic schools. Certainly the Ghana government has the Ghana Education Trust Fund, but that is for all schools within the country. The Islamic institutes, such as the one that we show the buildings that are very good, they get funding from outside Ghana, such as the United Arab Emirates. But if you are doing that, then you should also look at the diplomatic implications of such external funding to education. And I think that that is something that a conversation needs to be had on. Let me draw this to a conclusion by saying that I know that USAID did a field study on this particular subject, late 2006, 2007, I believe. I know the people who did the research in Ghana, and that was a very 10-day kind of research. Our research is started around 1998, and that we just finished, it's about a 10-year research, and we did a lot of interviews that are available. And we hope that in the future we can actually post it somewhere where more and more people can have access to. So let me stop here, and hopefully you may have questions that we can then have a conversation for the next 20 minutes or so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. That was pretty interesting. And while our participants are typing in their questions in the chat box below, I have a question, not being very knowledgeable about the subject. You talk about the difference of schools that have received public funding versus the ones that are privately held. Could you talk about kind of what's the ratio there and what are the key differences?
Well, this is the thing. Ghana always had most Christian schools because they were the people who actually started education, because the colonial government actually deferred secular education and everything literacy to the missionaries. It was not until about 1882 when the government actually provided additional funding to the schools on the basis that they will accept to include government curriculum, similar to what the government is doing now for Islamic schools. So the majority of people who have gone to school in Ghana, I would say 80% of my generation, actually 60 or something like that, everybody went to Christian school. Currently, I would say that about 50% may be going to Christian schools. But you also have the Kwame Nkrumah secularization of schools, whereby local authority communities were given government support to establish schools. So from the local community and the Christian schools, about 90% of everybody in school is actually attending this form of school. But the point that I'm trying to make is that these are very well established schools because they have been around for quite a long time. And the Islamic schools that are now being brought into the system have not had that particular opportunity to develop infrastructure or to develop alumni that can be coming back to the village to help them do things. So that is the argument that we are making.
Okay, and Mr. Prinsloo, our director, actually spent quite a bit of time in Africa, and he has a couple comments in the chat box. Again, I encourage anybody to enter their questions there. While he confesses to a bit of a negative prejudice, he asked the question, how or what are Islamic schools in Ghana teaching their students, particularly the female, about Islamic jihadist extremists, Al-Qaeda support the nature of some of the Muslims?
Yes, this is a very good question because that is also something that we really were inspired to do, because almost all the big literature work that were coming out since 9/11 had focused on terrorism and the content of Islamic education, and that has actually overridden the concerns of Muslims who are religious oriented or want here will be Robert Hefner and Mohammed Zaman. They wrote a book titled Schooling Islam. And then the other one is also, you have, what's his name, Hefner on as the editor, that actually talked about making modern Muslims. These two books are edited pieces, and they have contributions from North Africa all the way to Pakistan in terms of the concern of those who are not concerned about terrorism, but rather trying to educate their children. And that's the approach that we took for this book. But I can also go further to say that when you look at the traditional, what we refer to as the recitation Muslim schools, they are teaching the children how to recite the pages of the Quran so that they can of the Prophet Muhammad. And then, of course, when you go to the 1950s, for example, the larger Muslim schools added English to the curriculum so that they can actually have people who can read and write English, or at least understand instructions in English. And these are the people who are going to be working for as truck drivers or as mining workers and so and so, and they are still at the bottom part of the economy. And these are the schools that later on will become large enough for the government to think that if you introduce larger content of secular education curriculum, then you can actually make an impact. What we found out was that as these people embraced the curriculum, they also retained the content of the Islamic courses because they can afford to fund it. The village schools cannot. So the village schools are going to have 3 hours per week of Arabic. The large Muslim schools are going to have the full content of Islamic education plus secular education. So they are starting about 7 o'clock in the morning and they are going all the way to about 4 p.m. in the evening. The secular teachers come in for about 9 o'clock to about noon or 2 o'clock at best, and that actually disappeared. And you find that you are seeing the Saudi trained kind of instructors in Islamic Hadith in terms of Quranic learning, Arabic, all of them at the schools teaching. And then the secular teachers become almost like an appendage to this particular system. That to me should be a concern in the sense that they are putting too much emphasis on the instruction of religion and that there should be some kind of a balance that is effectively within the system. They are not teaching anyone about Al-Qaeda, but they are very much aware of the Al-Qaeda kind of concept, and I'll throw in that they are not opposed to secular education as the state actually has implemented. Rather, they would like to see that there is much more combination that actually fits their curriculum.
Thank you very much. Another question from Mr. Prinsloo. To what extent do you think that the current economic growth in Ghana and the internationalization and similar type dynamics temper or encourage the secularization or allow the growth of expansion of these Islamic schools and the coursework in them?
Yeah, another very good question. I think that it aids the secularization of the process. The government of Ghana itself had very much engaged in spreading university and tertiary education to the north. So that which used to be a teacher training college before, series of secondary schools, are now the University of Developmental Studies, and it has campuses across the north. Nursing degree, teacher training, health sciences are all being very much encouraged. With the discovery of oil, the economy becomes diversified, and I think that what the economy does for people is that those who are in these particular schools can also benefit if only the government will invest adequately in the system. Some kind of technical education, because we don't have community college types in Ghana. I think that if there is a community college type and skill training injected into the school system, which the 1975 Education Review actually thought that they should do, and which the 1985 second review indicated that they should do, which the 1986 review or 2006 review said again that they should do, if you inject basic skill training into the school systems, I think that you are going to create a very, very good workforce to which all people will benefit. And I think that that's what the government should stress.
Thank you very much. And there's an interesting question here from Dr. Buffington. Do these Muslim secular schools teach English or only Arabic? You mentioned the Anglican schools. One of the issues with Muslim schools is that their Arabic-only curriculum makes them ill-prepared for advanced technical degrees that are usually taught in English or maybe French. How do these the secular schools, whether they're Muslim or the Anglican ones, handle this language issue?
Ghana has a policy that the medium of instruction for all school students should be in English. So English is the medium of instruction across the board. If you go to the Arabic, because that is interesting question, because previously they used Hausa as the lingua franca. And the educated Muslims, they said, oh, we should make it modern, and modern means using Arabic as the medium of instruction. So once they embrace the government curriculum, then English becomes equal to Arabic within the school system. And whenever you say that the government is going to pay for Arabic instruction, and the government says we can pay for only one teacher for Arabic instruction, some of the schools will say that we are too large for one teacher to instruct in Arabic. So they go ahead and hire their own teachers to do so. But in terms of the day-to-day instruction in mathematics, in history, in geography, all those things are done in English. So they become very much bilingual. I see somebody talking about French here as well. One of the concerns that they have expressed, and this happened in the early 2000 and is still an issue, that the government of Ghana will say English is then you have the local languages, Akan, Fanti, and other languages are subject areas that you have a national exam that tests it. Yet, Arabic is not on the list. And so there's an argument from the Muslim community that their concerns in terms of Arabic is not being supported. I talked to one of the persons. He used to be the secretary to the OAU. And he argues that it was because of his learning of Arabic that actually made it possible for him to be a translator at the OAU, and therefore the AU currently responsible for paying for it. And the second thing too is that then of course it shifts the emphasis to religious studies as opposed to secular learning. So the debate is still there, and I think that those particular concerns must be addressed as time moves forward.
Yes, sir. Do you see this debate? Do you see the gap widening between the privately owned, primarily the Muslim schools, and the state-supported ones that will have, based on policy, the English? Do you see that gap widening, or is that something that can be worked with?
Well, the gap remains the same insofar as the government does not put the money into Arabic studies. The large schools are providing their own Arabic teachers. And the interesting thing, and I think this should be of interest to you, that even in the Ahl Sunnah school, with a tall building and everything provided, the school system went from K to 9. That is through the junior secondary school system. There is a senior secondary school system within the complex, but at that point it is purely Islamic learning, and the students continue on to Saudi Arabia for Islamic studies. So there is no secular senior secondary school system as yet that is very, very effective in attracting a large number of Muslim students. There is an Islamic secondary school in Kumasi, which actually is secular in a sense, but that is one of the few in the country. So in terms of the gap, you're going to see a gap that exists. actually go into the public system. One of the imams made the point to me that they stress religious studies at the basic level because they are very sure that majority of their children are going to go to the public system, and therefore they want to lay a foundation for their religion in the basic level. So if one is able to follow through, yes, you can say that the gap may expand, but we are not very sure on that based on our studies.
Thank you very much, sir. And I think that's about all the time we have for the questions. Did you have any thoughts you'd like to leave us with as we wrap up?
Yes, I do, and this is a point I have made to certain people in DC whenever I have had the opportunity, that the most serious thing that confront all governments in West Africa, and I believe in Africa, is the lack of economic development. If you have effective economic development, transparency in government, such as the tracking Muslim terrorists, but rather tracking governments that are not meeting the obligations that citizens expect of them in terms of education and the provision of amenities that actually make private citizens contribute to national development. And I think that investment in the Islamic schools, especially at the community level, is a critical thing to get children to school and make the community become engaged. So that is the point I want to leave this particular presentation on, and I thank you all for the opportunity to participate in this program.